Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Here in Washington, D.C. It's a place I haven't actually been to, the district, much in the last 6 months. I've been hanging out in the suburbs. I think, Joe, actually, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have made more trips to the District of Columbia than I have in the last
6
half a year.
That's
He's making his
true.
7th during the Trump administration.
It's pretty remarkable.
Today.
7th. We didn't really see him on the last one. We may not see him today, which is interesting. They're talking about some pretty critical stuff here with potential strikes against Iran. Gaza, of course, is on the agenda as well. But we didn't even see him go in the front door, Kailey, and I'll be curious to see how long they talk.
Yeah, and if we learn anything about what exactly they discuss, as we know, Israel may be singing a bit of a different tune than President Trump himself on as to what they'd like to see from Iran and its nuclear and ballistic missile program specifically.
That's true. Obviously, we've heard from Iran wanting to sort of narrow these talks around nukes, but Israel is deeply concerned about the progress being made on its ballistic missile program, and I'm sure he'll be urging the president to get into that. But also, having claimed that their nuclear program had been totally obliterated, the president today has to face the Israeli prime minister, who wants him to acknowledge the fact that they are making progress on rebuilding it. Yeah,
and let alone, of course, progress on rebuilding Gaza or reaching the next phase of the ceasefire agreement. There's still an open question mark in that regard, too.
That's for sure. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is with us, Washington correspondent, live from the North Lawn of the White House, where all of this is happening. Tyler, do we expect to see these two gentlemen later today?
Well, Joe, at this point, nothing remains open to the press, perhaps underscoring the sensitivity of these discussions. As you and Kailey were just outlining, we know Iran is at the top of the agenda amid reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to present new intelligence to President Trump regarding Iran's military capabilities. Now, ultimately, we know that this meeting this week comes after the Israeli Prime Minister had met in Jerusalem last week with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the two that are leading the now bilateral negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, which kicked off last Friday, and both sides characterized as relatively positive and said that they're going to have future talks likely next week when it comes to the second round. But going into the discussions, we know that there was sort of this shifting of parameters around what the talks would revolve around. Iran wanted them to be bilateral and only focused on their nuclear program. But part of the Israeli Prime Minister's goal here today, it's our understanding, is to press President Trump to make sure that those talks expand to other key issues for Israel and the United States. As we've repeatedly heard here from top administration officials, they want to also discuss Iran's ballistic missile program, as well as its support for proxy militia groups in the region. And the U.S. actually wants to bring in some other regional partners to these discussions, which officials say could help ultimately bolster the potential that a longer lasting deal could remain in place. At the moment, President Trump maintains diplomacy is on the table. But Joe and Kailey, as you well know, our own analysts at Bloomberg Economics have spoken about the high likelihood that we could ultimately see military strikes, particularly as President Trump just yesterday floated the idea that he could send a second armada to the region to bolster what is already a very large presence of U.S. military assets in the Arabian Sea.
Yeah, could be bringing in another carrier potentially. We'll see whether or not we get more commentary from the president in that regard, or anything at all that he might say about his meeting with Netanyahu today, Tyler. So far today, though, the only thing we've directly heard from the president on Truth Social, at least, is praise for the jobs report we got on this Wednesday. He said great jobs numbers, far greater than expected. No surprise, perhaps, that the White House is trying to focus exclusively on the positive here.
Right. No surprise there, Kailey. Even as this report showed revisions to last year, there was this market slowdown in hiring. President Trump also in that post calling for lower interest rates, even as we know that traders are now pushing back bets for a Fed rate cut. So there's a lot that the administration is going to try to pull out of this report. They are focused on that upside surprise. It was interesting to hear officials ahead of this report, including the NEC director, Kevin Hassett, as well as the senior trade counselor, Peter Navarro, try to actually downplay downplay expectations, saying that any weakness that may come is ultimately due to shifting population changes and the president's deportation policies. I've heard a few officials out this morning blaming any weakness on the prior administration, because this White House right now is really playing defense when it comes to the economy as we head into the midterm elections. I point you to a new poll out just this week from Gallup that shows 50% of U.S. adults are concerned about unemployment going up in the next 6 months and view the economy, but in particular the labor market, negatively. So there's going to be a lot to watch here as we head into November. But as you well know, this administration is really pushing those domestic manufacturing policies. In this report, we did see that factory jobs increased for the first time since late 2024, something that White House officials here have been pushing pretty strongly.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live on the North Lawn at the White House. Thank you so much. And standing in the spot where Tyler was standing just now earlier this morning was actually the acting chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Pierre Yared, who spoke with Bloomberg earlier today about these jobs numbers. This is how he characterized the figures.
Not only is it total jobs that are up above expectations, it's also private sector jobs that are at 170,000, so more than, or 160,000, which are more than double expectations. I think the way to think about the way we were thinking about it is if you look at demographic changes as well as the big reduction in immigration relative to, in particular, illegal immigration relative to what was happening under the Biden administration, those two factors should lead you to lower break-evens.
And joining us now for another analysis, perhaps, is Kailey Richards, who's here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. She's Senior Strategic Advisor at the Groundwork Collaborative, also former official at the Treasury Department under the Biden administration. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and
Radio.
Thank you so much for having you
me.
Again, Kailey. When we consider the first part of what he had to say there, this notion that jobs were double what the average expectation was. We did see a lower than expected unemployment rate, even as labor force participation was picking up. That is one way you could view and characterize this report. The other is, of course, look at the revisions. Look at how gains are kind of exclusively in sectors like healthcare. How do you look at it today?
That's right. I do feel like focusing on the revisions is important. And I don't want to take away from the fact that we beat expectations on the labor market for January, although I do think that it's important to recall that expectations were quite low. So the revisions that the BLS announced led to a total net job gain for last year of 181,000 jobs. That is a number that we used to see as a month-over-month gain on a pretty regular basis. And in fact, in the 10 years prior to last year, the average job gain over the year was about 1.9 million jobs a year. So what we've seen is this very anemic job growth. And, I was here last year during some of these prints, and it was already concerning what was happening with the unemployment rate, what was happening with the pace of hires and firing, and to then see that actually we were way off and the labor market was much softer than it appeared, I think is troubling, though it does kind of align with some of the anecdotes that we've been hearing from job seekers who say it's difficult to find a job. We're seeing those jobs numbers start to look a little bit more like that soft labor market that people were experiencing.
Interesting, Kitty. But the president says the golden age of America is upon us. So when do the jobs start showing up?
I think that's a great question. And, Kailey, you mentioned that what we saw in the revisions and in the monthly data is increasingly what job growth there is driven by the healthcare sector specifically. And in fact, last year outside of healthcare, there was actually a net reduction in jobs across the economy. And thinking about, where are those healthcare jobs? Are they good jobs? Are they going to continue to deliver, especially given that the president has passed into law really large healthcare cuts that are going to start coming down the pike over the next few years, and families are having to face really high healthcare premiums. Thinking about, we see GDP growth continuing, and people are often very focused on, is this a sign of a recession? Are we at a tipping point? But I think the bigger question is, how is the economy performing for real people? Mm-hmm. And so when we see GDP growth that is driven to an outsized extent by, for example, the building and stocking with materials of data centers for AI. One way to look at that is that AI is driving GDP growth, but is it driving jobs? Is it driving increases in wages? Or is it just sort of an accounting fact that we have a lot being spent on computers? So really thinking about how this impacts workers and the day-to-day. And we might not be in a recessionary environment, but you can still have a softening labor market that's going to hold down wages, going to make it hard, especially for new graduates and other entrants into the labor market, to get a job that can pay the bills.
Well, and I'm sure the Fed and officials there are considering some of those very same questions you were asking about what dynamics are actually at play here, both when it comes to growth overall and in the labor market. So if you're sitting in the Federal Reserve right now, you look at all this data before you, is it supporting the idea that we need looser policy, that more cuts should be coming, or not?
I think it's a complicated question for the Fed to deal with because, of course, inflation remains elevated. And the Fed is very concerned about signaling to the markets that they are going to keep inflation under control and bring it back down. You know, Jerome Powell has reiterated on multiple occasions that the Fed's target rate is still 2%, and we're well above that. And so they are balancing those equities. I do think that, the president's advocacy is a little bit of a double-edged sword. As you were pointing out, he's at the same time saying that this was incredibly strong labor market conditions that we're seeing, and also we should cut interest rates. I think there are also issues with the new nominee for the Fed Board of Governors, for the Fed chair, is really being received as mostly a political appointment who will do what the president says or will try to. I think that other members of the Fed Board of Governors are going to be concerned about maintaining a posture of neutrality and of independence. And it's all going to be really difficult as it plays out. And I'll be watching along with you.
I want to get back to this impact of AI on the job market, because it's impossible to quantify right now. Elon Musk just told a podcast that created this vision of buildings 20, 30 stories tall, filled with humans doing calculations that will soon be replaced by a laptop. If you can't forecast that, how does the Fed forecast that? How do you have any estimate for where we're going?
I think that we are in a little bit uncharted territory in some ways, but also this isn't the first time that we've had a potentially disruptive technology enter the scene. And I think it's important to keep our wits about us as we measure what we think of Elon Musk's predictions versus what we're actually seing in the labor market.
Well, I could point you to Anthropic, and it only gets worse from here in some cases, by the way, that will all be replaced at some point. You're going to have two AI Kailey and Joe sitting here interviewing Kitty Richards.
I mean, one thing that I'd say is that what we know from the history of technology adoption is that it's really up to us as a society to decide whether technologies like AI are used to provide more to Americans, to provide more, leisure, more productivity gains that lead to higher wages, support people in their jobs, or whether things just kind of get worse and worse and cost-cutting increases and people are de-skilled, people's jobs are de-skilled. These are policy choices that we really have to make. And I think if we just let the sort of techno-optimists who also stand to make another $1 trillion, if things go their way, if we let them entirely set the agenda, we're going to see the worst possible effects.
He was wearing a T-shirt that said "Optimism Prime." It's funny.
Optimism for whom?
Yeah.
You could probably do a whole thing on Elon Musk and the various T-shirts.
It's gotta be
remember
true.
the apparel he had early on in the early days of this administration. Just quickly, Kitty, before we let you go, as we're approaching tax refunds, we are in tax season now, and the argument Republicans are making is Americans are about to get a way bigger refund than they expected, and this is going to be juice for the economy. Given everything that we're seeing with the cost inflation with wages not necessarily keeping up, as you were alluding to. Should we expect that's going to be funneled back into consumption, consumer spending, or is that literally just assistance in making ends meet?
Well, unfortunately for the Republicans making this argument, I think that given how much they've hyped up the effects of their tax policies, Americans might be expecting a significantly larger refund than they are going to get. Because remember that the vast majority of the Republicans' tax bill flowed to the wealthy and corporations. And so your typical American family did not have much to gain there. What they have seen, unfortunately, is these skyrocketing healthcare premiums, partly because of the expiration of the ACA subsidies. And what they're going to see out of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is Medicaid cuts that are already starting to impact hospitals and state budgets around the country.
Great to have Katie Richards back with us in studio. We never got to 15% growth. We have so much more to talk about.
Next time.
Don't be a stranger. Senior Strategic Advisor, the Groundwork Collaborative, and great insights from Katie Richards. Thank you, as always, for the conversation. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel next, only here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Joe and I here in Washington are keeping an eye on the White House as well as on Capitol Hill today and every day. And there will be some action on Capitol Hill potentially later this evening, specifically when it comes to a vote in the House of Representatives on the president's tariffs policy, tariffs on Canada specifically. It's a resolution that has been put forward by Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York that will now see a vote forced, despite the attempts of the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, to make sure that that did not happen, putting some of his vulnerable members in the majority in a tricky position of going on the record as to whether or not they support these policies. Because Speaker Johnson, despite knowing that he had a very thin majority and the math was going to be hard, did try to pass a rule yesterday, Joe, that would have seen effectively an extension of the ban of putting forward tariff-related resolutions like this on the House floor. And 3 Republicans told the Speaker and the President, we're not with you on this one.
That's true. Not all the names surprising, but this is getting back to why margins matter here. 217, 214. The Speaker's seen this movie a lot of times. All right. Tom Massey of Kentucky. I know you're not surprised. Add Kevin Kailey of California, Don Bacon of Nebraska, and it's a fail. The question is, and we'll have to pose this to the panel, is this a watershed moment or just a jailbreak of 3 members?
Well, and when we consider the composition of those 3 members, yes, Bacon's retiring, Massey, as you point out, not unusual to break with the party. Kevin Kailey, though, could potentially be representative of an entire group of Republicans, those who are in swing districts having tough seats to defend, who have to consider these policies and what they mean for their constituencies a bit more carefully. So could there be more Kevin Kaileys coming out of the woodwork on actual tariff resolutions?
Well, you outlined that perfectly. And this is what Democrats are hoping, because they're going to want to have a series of votes like the one tonight with Meeks on Canada to try to put Republicans on the record, knowing that this won't likely become law. The president's going to veto it. But a lot of political ads can be made in the meantime. We're going to find out who's worried about tariffs and who is worried about Trump. Let's assemble our panel for their take on this. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. Jeannie is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, a partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist. How are you reading these 3, Rick, knowing that the Senate has already voted against Donald Trump's tariff regime? Is this, in fact, a rebuke? Did the president find the line, or are we making too much out of this?
Yeah, I think Kailey nailed it with sort of the various motivations, although I would say Kevin Kailey, I mean, he actually doesn't have a district. His was wiped out with Proposition 50, the redistricting. So he's out there wandering around trying to figure out where he's going to run for re-election. But he does plan to run for re-election. But he does represent, I would say, almost the majority of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, who are very offended that the president has usurped their Article 1 constitutional responsibility to make tariffs. And so if you needed 4 votes and not just the 3 that you got, would you have gotten another Republican? Probably. And I would say, too, with this one, this goes right to the White House. I mean, yeah, we like to see the speaker deliver the votes. But the White House said, you know what, this is on us. We're going to make this happen. we're going to put the pressure on these guys. And so the White House Ledge Office was all over this thing. And this is a huge loss for Trump. It's his first big loss legislatively where he thought he could actually win. And so is this a thing of the future? Maybe. A lot of these guys are from districts that are not going to be easy to win re-election in a bad cycle year. And I wouldn't be surprised to see more jailbreaks in that regard.
Well, so when we consider the potential scope and scale of said jailbreaks, Jeannie, Rick just suggested it might be a majority of the Republican conference in the House of Representatives that actually disapproves or at least wants the congressional authority to be the one that matters on tariffs. Are we wrong in assuming that a 2/3 majority, veto-proof majority, could actually be present or not be present on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of there's so many confounding things about what happened last night to me. Number one, if this passed Congress, the president was going to veto it, and it was going to, it's hard for me to imagine he wouldn't survive that veto. But, setting that aside, we knew very clearly, because all three of these individuals forecast that they were not going to vote for this thing. So Mike Johnson knew it. The White House should have known it. And yet they let it go forward as if it wasn't going to be a big loss for them, as opposed to what you would think a normal White House would do is you are facing a very difficult election year in just 9 months from yesterday. Let your Republican members in these swing districts, these purple districts, who are trying desperately to win, give them a little latitude to go against you on something that most Republicans don't support, which is tariffs and taxes. But instead, they want to keep everybody together. And, to me, this seems like the same thing we see Pam Bondi doing in the DOJ. Mike Johnson is playing to an audience of one. You go to the DOJ, try for indictments you're never going to get. You go to the floor, try for votes you're never going to get, and then say to Donald Trump, oh, listen, I tried, can't blame me. Look at the grand jurors or look at Tom Massey if you're upset. I mean, I think that's what's going on here, but it makes no sense politically or strategically for these Republicans or for this White House.
Well, I'll tell you, it also did not make sense, apparently, to a grand jury to indict the 6 Democratic members of Congress who urged members of the military in a video that came out some weeks ago now, we've talked about it, to not follow unlawful orders. This is when we were busy blowing up alleged drug boats coming out of Venezuela. And you remember this video, Alyssa Slotkin, Mark Kelly, and others? Here's a little refresher.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
and intelligence community professionals
against American citizens. Like us, you all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad,
but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
That was called sedition by the president. This grand jury decided that this was not a case. They failed to secure the indictment here, despite the better intentions of the attorney general. This is something that came up in Pam Bondi's testimony earlier. Rick, what do you make of this? I know that Mark Kelly is still in some hot water here with Pete Hegseth specifically, but as far as these other members go, is this a good day for the Constitution? If you read the quote from Jason Crow, the Democrat from Colorado who we saw there, I can't even read it on the air. I'll do my best. If these effers think they're going to intimidate us and threaten and bully me into silence, they have another thing coming. Rick, this is clearly a bridge too far. What's the recourse?
Are you baiting me to do something I shouldn't do on air? No, I doubt
I wouldn't.
Look, I mean, this is the most confounding thing I've ever seen. First of all, it was a total political stunt by these 6 Democrats to do that video. I mean, when does anybody do a video to talk writ large to 1 million uniformed service personnel? I mean, come on. But what happens? The White House totally takes the bait. I mean, like, you're supposed to ignore stuff like this. And in taking the bait, not only does the president say some pretty injurious stuff about, like, this is seditious and these people should be put to death. That's a bad thing, right? That's a bad news day for Donald Trump. He doesn't really mean it. I'm highly confident he doesn't want to put Mark Kelly to death. But at the end of the day, he unleashes the Justice Department on him. And then what happens? They elevate Mark Kelly. Now people are talking about him running for president of the United States in 2028. I mean, like, that's the best thing that ever happened to Mark Kelly's political career. So, you know, I don't understand why everyone isn't just taking a step back on this and saying, you know what, this makes absolutely no sense. Why are we prosecuting this thing? And now to get the black eye of a grand jury saying no to the Justice Department, by the way, in another high-profile case, like the Comey and the Letitia James case, they're like striking out at the plate. So I don't know. I mean, to me, this was all very avoidable. But I guess if you want to play, you gotta decide whether you're going to win or lose.
Yeah. Well, and to the point Rick is making on these strikeouts, Jeannie, arguably the bar for a grand jury indictment isn't incredibly high necessarily. We're not talking conviction here. This is just the indictment to try to make to bring the case forward. Do you take heart in the fact that this isn't necessarily just everything the DOJ wants, the DOJ is getting?
Yeah, the old ham sandwich, Kailey. And, you know, somebody was saying at the hearing today, the number of strikeouts by this DOJ is astronomical compared to any attempts to get grand jury indictments in the years before. And so I believe we are hearing Pam Bondi respond to messages that Donald Trump has accidentally sent her publicly. And I'm sure she's gotten a lot more heated messages from him privately saying, you need to pursue this. So again, very much like Mike Johnson, even though they know they're going to strike out, they keep pursuing this and end up looking weak. And, you know, somebody said, and it's so true, this video that they put forward is the same message that the Department of the Defense Law of War Manual says. And yet you're going to try to go to grand jurors and indict people for repeating what the Law of War Manual actually says. That's a non-starter. And God bless our grand jurors. We now are in a situation in this country where it is average people on the street who are hauled into a grand jury to sit, who are checking the president and the DOJ, who are wildly overstepping any sort of executive mandate. It's not a great place for our country to be, but it's where we are. And if we had courts that would do the same, we'd be in better shape. But now we have grand jurors who are saying this is a non-starter in a way they never have before in American history.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors in our political panel today. Thank you both, as always.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Really seems like it should be Thursday. Is it just me? And until this ice is gone, it's going to probably feel like that. We're just grinding through winter. But the fact is we're back above freezing. And if you're here in the nation's capital, maybe in New York or Boston, you can relate. If you're listening to me in LA, you can laugh at us later. Because Snowcrete remains our reality. And if you think you're a big shot because you survived Snowmageddon, you saw nothing until Snowcrete. 20 days of temperatures below freezing. Are you kidding me? So everyone's walking around and you're looking to see like bros with shorts and flip-flops on by the end of the day, sliding across the ice with a little bit of a melt starting here. And people are like walking across the river now and on ponds and stuff. You see this, James? Producer James, by the way, an avid ice fisherman. If you get bored in the winter, that's who you want to be with. Ice cover on area waterways at its most extensive level in decades. In fact, local ponds are apparently completely frozen all the way to the bottom. So playing hockey is taken on new meaning here this winter, but it's not going to last long. The melt is beginning, and the mud is coming to the swamp. The question is, will the Department of Homeland Security be open beyond the end of this week even? And it's kind of looking like a no right now. We set the baseline on what's happening on Capitol Hill with administration officials talking reportedly with Democratic leadership, but there is no deal yet when it comes to putting controls or restrictions on ICE and therefore unlocking a funding package that could pass. So we could be in a world in which 11 agencies are up and running, but DHS is closed, unless, of course, there's a continuing resolution, Progressives say they don't want that, and same for the Freedom Caucus, right? So no one's getting along. And it's times like these we benefit from a couple of minutes with Maura Gillespie, a veteran of John Boehner's Speaker's office, Republican strategist, now the force behind Blue Stack Strategies. It's great to see you in the nation's capital.
Thanks for having me.
We did away with some of the ice before you, but I'm sure it's worse in New Jersey anyway, right?
But there's still ice here.
There's a lot.
I can tell you, I wiped out earlier today.
No, you didn't, really?
I did, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
In a very cartoon-esque fashion.
I don't believe that. Did anyone see it?
Yeah.
Really?
I would hope that some people saw it.
For their own sense of humor.
Yeah, just listen.
That's very gracious of you. I took a major digger on the ice about 2 weeks ago, and it was like one of those redefining. I was seeing stars. And it's definitely changed the way I approach my walk into the office. So humbling indeed. How humbled will Mike Johnson be at the end of this week? Because it's not looking like this is going to turn into a deal. But it's funny, Maura, I keep seeing headlines about cautious optimism, light at the end of the tunnel. You're saying there's a chance. Are you buying any of that?
What other position does he have to have? I mean, he's got to try and stay optimistic given what he's got in a conference where he doesn't have much to wiggle room to have. He's got to stay optimistic. You know, you got Senator John Thune coming out saying he's really urging Democrats to play ball, to find a way to resolve this because, as he pointed out, TSA doesn't get funded if DHS goes without funding again. And the lapse is just to DHS, as you already pointed out. Everything else is funded. But they're only funded, more or less through a continuing circumstance anyway. Appropriations policy, typically it's done in the summer and then goes through another process. But we've kind of pushed and kicked the can down the road so often that's kind of why we're here where we are now. But it becomes a numbers game, as it has been for Speaker Johnson. And I think Thune is trying to do as much as he can to help him be in better footing.
Is there anything that Republicans, that you're hearing at least, are willing to offer beyond body cameras? Was kind of, I think, the attempt by the agency to say, hey, okay, we're just going to do this right now. But when it comes to demasking, total breakdown. When it comes to judicial warrants, total breakdown. Is there anything that Democrats walk away with here or no?
It's interesting because you're seeing different states say that they're going to be enforcing that mask rule.
Yeah.
I don't know how they're going to do that without having. Ugly. Yeah. And I think that's where you're going to see maybe some movement, because if states put pressure on their members saying, we're looking to do this, you need to push, kind of push back, that's going to become an issue. So I do think there's going to be some conversations going on between state and federal to maybe then get them to either acquiesce on the position that Republicans have or vice versa.
So are you considering a world in which DHS shuts down indefinitely? I mean, there's been a conversation about how do we silo DHS, but or ICE, I guess, would be the real way of putting it, while also funding FEMA, Coast Guard, and the TSA. Is that possible? Could appropriators do this?
I don't know how they'll separate it. I do think that's going to be a problem. I'm sure it's what members would love to have happen, because it's easier for them to get behind a bill that supports FEMA, supports TSA agents, and making sure that that's all covered. But there's something that's going to get done between today is Wednesday, Friday is the deadline. So if so many members are saying they're not going to be part of this continuing resolution, you're going to start hearing from organizations and from constituents who are concerned about travel. There's already enough concerns about travel right now. We just saw the FAA just put out this El Paso and then overturned it within a matter of, which felt like hours.
Totally bizarre.
Very bizarre situation. And so more questions and more confusion. And that's the last thing that airports need is fearful travelers. It's already a heightened situation. And so I do think that a continuing resolution to get through Friday and through the weekend, if they're not willing to play ball there, then you have to look at what's going to happen next week. And members weren't slated to be, at least the House, to be in town.
Yeah. TSA would go without pay once we get into March, from what I understand. So maybe Democrats see a couple of weeks to play with before this becomes an urgent front page story. Airport story. But talk to me about what happened with this tariff vote yesterday. This is interesting, and it is being framed, at least in the tip sheets this morning, as a very big deal, a turning point. Donald Trump finally found the line in the Republican-led House and Senate. What we're really talking about is 217, 214. 3 Republicans crossed over to block future votes or to block a block on future votes over the president's tariffs. Mike Johnson tried like heck to keep the conference together. Is this a watershed moment or a jailbreak of just 3 members?
I think what it shows you is that there is an appetite to reclaim control over a power that the Congress has. Article 1 of the Constitution. And many members have privately expressed frustration over it being handed over to the president because they also know that back at home, tariffs, while it was messaged differently during the campaign, it's a tax. And it's largely felt by the American consumer. And that's a message that they're having a hard time not only justifying to their constituents, but then in talking from a constitutional aspect, that's a role that they had, that the speaker has more or less given over to the president. And I understand that Speaker Johnson's approach to this is saying, let's let the courts play out and let them decide. Members who have said, okay, fine, they've waited a long time for the court to decide on tariffs, and it still hasn't come out yet. And so presented with this vote last night, they chose to say, no, I'm going to reclaim the position of the ability of Congress to make decisions on tariffs. I don't know that I necessarily say it's a watershed moment, but it may give other members who are feeling this privately a little bit more courage to say, I support that.
Okay, so that's my next question is because Democrats aren't waiting around. There's going to be a vote tonight, it looks like, on Gregory Meek's bill when it comes to Canada tariffs. And they're going to come around again and again and again to try to get Republicans on the record one way or the other. You either like tariffs and you can make Trump happy and maybe your constituents unhappy, or you're going to cross the boss on this. Is that the actual strategy here?
Well, I'd have to see what Gregory Meek's legislative kind of text is, because if it's revolving around this bridge situation that we saw kind of play out on social media this week, that may give some members some cover to say, well, we're still figuring this part out with Canada.
Picture, though.
Bigger picture.
Do you want to be called out if you're a Republican?
Being put on record?
Being put on record here.
Saying you're pro-tariffs,
because the president can veto
pro-taxes.
Whatever they pass, right?
Right. That becomes a problem, again, when you're getting, we inch every day closer to the 2026 midterms. Yep. And they're going to be on record saying that they are pro-tariffs, pro-taxes. That's going to be a problem, and it's ripe for an advertisement against them come the summer. Over
and over and over. By the way, the Senate has already voted against these tariffs. I'm assuming that there's no anti-veto majority here.
And you have several senators who have come out saying, this is our responsibility. In the Constitution, it lays it out for Congress to decide on taxes and tariffs, and then for the executive to implement it. And I think on this show I've said it's hard for me to recognize that I've agreed with Rand Paul more times this year than I can really remember in my lifetime on the Hill. But he has been pretty vocal about it, and among others who have, again, pointed to the constitutionality of this position to give them cover in their conservative, values, that they're standing by the Constitution and the president isn't. And so trying to draw that line, I also think is going to be a benefit to them as they look forward in their elections, because again, the president's not running again, right? He can't, and they are. And if they are, they need to be standing in their conservative principles. And so this is in a position where they could point out that difference.
This is going to get even more interesting after the midterms, but he's trying very, very hard to put himself on the ballot. It's going to be a Republican midterm convention. Does that keep the conference largely in line until then?
I don't know that it does.
No?
I do think that there are more and more cracks in the Trump stronghold as people recognize the economy is not where it was supposed to be, that was promised, that these ICE raids have been more damaging and making people feel less safe, which is the opposite goal, which was intended to create a safer, stronger security. And you find more and more of these fissures in the Republican stronghold that Trump has had. And I think, you're pointing to some off-ramps for Republicans to look to and say, I'm standing for my constituents, not just for what the administration is pushing out today.
Really interesting. I think you pointed to something really important, and remember this if and when it happens. This could turn into a states versus federal law enforcement issue when it comes to masking if Congress can't figure this out.
And it may.
That in itself is a pretty scary prospect.
It is, but I also think you have to remember that conservatives, in a principle, they believe in smaller, more accountable government. And that's what that looks like.
States' rights.
Absolutely.
Great to see you.
Thanks,
Maura Gillespie, what a rare treat to have the founder of Blue Stack Strategies with us in the flesh in Washington. Let us know when you're back in town, and I'm sure you'll be back on our panel soon. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.